The Bronze Age world was far more connected than we ever realized. Across 3,000 years, from the banks of the Nile to the plains of Mesopotamia and the shores of the Aegean, a hidden network of commerce pulsed with life. These were not isolated kingdoms but parts of a sophisticated, interdependent system linked by forgotten highways of trade. By the end of this story, you will see the ancient world not as a series of lonely monuments, but as a vibrant, global community. How did societies without modern maps or writing coordinate exchanges over thousands of miles, what drove them to risk everything for a blue stone or a rare metal? The answers rewrite our understanding of early civilization. What does it say about us that our first great societies were built not on isolation, but on connection? Think of a map, but not the kind with clear borders and country names. This was a map of desire, drawn in the minds of kings and merchants across 3 continents. For roughly 2,000 years, from around 3,300 before Common Era to 1,200 before Common Era, a remarkable phenomenon unfolded. In the river valleys of Mesopotamia, the floodplains of Egypt, along the Indus River, on the sun-drenched islands of the Aegean Sea, and in the rugged highlands of Anatolia, powerful civilizations rose not in isolation, but in a strange, synchronized chorus. We know them by legendary names: the Sumerians and Babylonians, the pharaohs of Egypt, the enigmatic Indus Valley cities, the palace builders of Minoan Crete and Mycenaean Greece, and the empire of the Hittites. They spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, and fought their own wars. Yet, beneath the surface of their distinct cultures, they were being woven together by invisible threads. Historians call this a world system, a network where regions become economically interdependent. They did not need to be under one ruler to rely on each other's resources. This was the first fragile web of globalization, and it was spun from materials we might consider mere luxuries today. The entire system pulsed for one reason: to move things that were beautiful, rare, and utterly essential to Bronze Age power. The quest for deep blue lapis lazuli, for golden amber, and most critically for the twin metals of copper and tin, would forge highways across mountains and seas, connecting worlds that were never supposed to meet. The true power of bronze lay in its recipe, a secret that would force the ancient world to reach out and connect. To create this revolutionary metal, you needed 2 ingredients. Copper, while valuable, could be found in many places, from the mountains of Cyprus to the hills of Oman. But the second ingredient, tin, was a different story. It was the ghost in the machine, a metal so vanishingly rare that its sources became the most closely guarded secrets of the age. While copper deposits were scattered across the map, major tin sources could be counted on one hand. The ancient mines of Badakhshan in modern Afghanistan, the distant, misty cliffs of Cornwall in Britain, and a few possible sources in Central Asia held nearly all the known tin in the world. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a fundamental problem of survival and power. You could have all the copper in the world, but without that crucial 10% of tin, you had no bronze. You had no superior weapons to defend your cities, no durable tools to farm your lands, no impressive ceremonial objects to project your authority. This geographical accident of nature, this cruel separation of 2 essential metals by thousands of miles, became the single greatest economic engine for long-distance trade the world had yet seen. It meant that no civilization, no matter how mighty, could be truly self-sufficient. A pharaoh in Egypt depended on merchants who braved deserts and seas to bring tin from a land he would never see. A king in Mesopotamia relied on networks that stretched into the high mountains of Afghanistan. The need for tin forced them to look beyond their borders, to establish not just casual trade, but secure, reliable supply lines across continents. It turned local chiefs into international merchants and dangerous routes into vital highways. The story of the Bronze Age, then, is in many ways the story of the relentless, world-spanning search for a dull grey stone. While the search for tin was a matter of military necessity, another substance traveled even farther for reasons of pure wonder. From the cold, pine-scented shores of the Baltic Sea came a treasure that seemed to hold sunlight itself, fossilized tree resin transformed over millions of years into a warm, golden stone. This was amber. To the cultures of the Mediterranean, it was a complete mystery, a piece of magic that arrived from the edge of the known world. It was lightweight, could be carved and polished to a brilliant shine, and when rubbed, it even generated static electricity, a seemingly supernatural property. For these reasons, it was coveted not just as jewelry, but as a protective amulet, a symbol of eternal life, and a sacred offering. Finding raw amber on a Baltic beach was one thing, but getting it into the hands of a Mycenaean prince or an Egyptian priest was a feat of coordination that rivals any modern logistics network. This was the journey of the Amber Roads. No single merchant made the entire trip. Instead, it moved hand to hand, tribe to tribe, in a long, slow relay from the north. The journey likely began with local gatherers along the Baltic coast. From there, the raw amber would travel south, perhaps along the great rivers like the Vistula or the Elbe, used as natural highways. At certain points, it would be traded to intermediaries, communities who controlled key crossings or portages between river systems. These groups acted as the links in the chain, adding value and moving the goods ever closer to the sophisticated markets of the south. By the time this golden resin reached the shores of the Adriatic or the Aegean, it had passed through countless hands, its origin story becoming a legend in itself. The presence of Baltic amber in a tomb in Mycenae, over 1,500 miles from its source, is not just evidence of trade, it is proof of a functioning system. It tells us that information was flowing alongside the goods, that values were understood across linguistic barriers, and that desire for the exotic was powerful enough to sustain a supply chain that spanned the European continent. This was not a state-sponsored mission for a strategic metal, but a decentralized, organic network built on shared human fascination. What does it say that a beautiful stone could motivate such enduring connections, linking the foggy north with the sun-drenched south in a continuous, whispering conversation of commerce and curiosity? Yet another stone traveled an even more astonishing road, one that began in the most forbidding of landscapes. Locked within the remote, rugged mountains of northeastern Afghanistan, in a place called Badakhshan, lay veins of a rock that fractured into a blue so deep it seemed to hold the essence of the night sky. This was Lapis Lazuli, and for the civilizations of the ancient Near East, it was the most precious color in the world. Unlike tin, which was a functional necessity, or amber, which was a beautiful curiosity, Lapis Lazuli held profound sacred and royal power. It was the color of the heavens, the hair of the gods, and the ultimate symbol of divine right. To possess it was to touch the eternal. But Badakhshan was not just remote, it was almost unreachable, separated from the great river valleys by a gauntlet of the world's highest peaks and most arid deserts. The journey of a single lump of raw lapis to a Sumerian temple or an Egyptian royal workshop is a story of human determination that defies belief. After being mined by hand in incredibly difficult conditions, the raw stone began a trek of over 2,000 miles. It would have been carried by pack animals through the mountain passes of the Hindu Kush, emerging onto the Iranian plateau. From there, merchant caravans would skirt the edges of the great central deserts, moving westward toward the markets of Mesopotamia. In cities like master craftsmen would painstakingly grind the stone into a precious powder for pigment, or carve it into beads, cylinder seals, and inlays for statues. But the journey did not stop there. Some of this Afghan stone traveled even farther, down the length of the Fertile Crescent, perhaps by ship along the coast, finally reaching the Nile. There, Egyptian artisans, who called it a stone from the sky, embedded it into their most magnificent creations. The most famous example is the funeral mask of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, its eyebrows and headdress inlaid with that brilliant celestial blue. That mask, an icon of Egyptian glory, is literally built around a piece of a distant Afghan mountain. This single material trail is perhaps the most definitive proof we have of an interconnected Bronze Age world. It tells us that value, in the eyes of these ancient cultures, was powerful enough to motivate a supply chain that crossed entire empires and geographic barriers we would consider daunting even today. The deep blue in a pharaoh's tomb whispers of merchants haggling in Mesopotamian bazaars, of miners in distant, dusty mountains, and of a world already bound together by a shared hunger for beauty and meaning. The silent, sunken evidence for this vast network lay hidden for over 3,000 years, until a sponge diver's accidental discovery off the rugged coast of southern Turkey. There, at a depth of nearly 150 feet, rested the broken hull of a merchant vessel now known as the Uluburun Shipwreck. Dating to around 1300 before Common Era, this single ship is nothing less than a Bronze Age time capsule, a frozen moment of global commerce preserved on the seabed. Its cargo was a staggering inventory of the ancient world's desires. The hold was packed with over 10 tons of raw copper ingots from Cyprus, shaped like stretched ox hides for easy transport. Alongside them were ingots of that ever-elusive treasure, tin. But the ship was more than a bulk carrier of metals. It carried raw ivory from African elephants, logs of precious ebony wood, vibrant blue glass ingots from Mesopotamia, and storage jars filled with terebinth resin, likely used for perfume or medicine. There were also finished goods like beautiful Canaanite jewelry, Baltic amber beads, and even a golden scarab inscribed with the name of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti. This was not a ship from one kingdom trading with another. It was a floating marketplace, a microcosm of the entire interconnected system. In its wooden frame, we see Cyprus, Egypt, Canaan, Mesopotamia, Mycenaean Greece, and lands as far north as the Baltic, all represented. The ship itself was likely Canaanite or Cypriot, but its crew was almost certainly multicultural, a team of merchants and sailors who could navigate not just the physical sea, but the complex social seas of different ports and cultures. The organization required is breathtaking. Someone had to coordinate the mining of Cypriot copper, the acquisition of Afghan tin or Central Asian tin, the felling of African ebony, and the crafting of Mesopotamian glass, consolidating it all at a single port before a perilous journey across the eastern Mediterranean. This was not haphazard trade, but a sophisticated, planned commercial operation. The Uluburun ship is our most powerful tangible proof. It tells us the scale was immense, the logistics were managed, and the entire enterprise was built on a foundation of shared economic language and trust that spanned continents. When that ship sank, it was not just a local tragedy, it was a shock to a global system, a lost link in a chain that stretched from the palaces of Greece to the courts of the pharaohs. Among all the treasures on that sunken ship, one cargo was more telling than gold. Scattered across the seafloor were dozens of copper ingots, each cast into a strange, distinctive shape. They looked like a stretched animal hide, with 4 corner extensions that made them easy to tie together and carry on poles. This was the Oxhide ingot, and it is perhaps the single most important clue to understanding how this vast trade network actually functioned. From the palaces of Mycenae to the ports of Canaan, from Sardinia in the west to Mesopotamia in the east, archaeologists have found these exact same shapes. Their consistency is startling. They were produced to a remarkably standardized weight, roughly 60 pounds each. This was not a coincidence. In a world without coinage or formal treaties, the Oxhide ingot became something far more valuable than raw metal. It became a universal unit of account, a pre-monetary currency trusted from one end of the Mediterranean to the other. Think of it like an ancient version of a gold bar, a guaranteed weight and purity that everyone agreed upon. A merchant in Cyprus could produce an ingot, and a merchant in Greece would know exactly what he was getting without needing to speak the same language or share the same measuring system. This standardization solved a fundamental problem of long-distance trade, friction. It eliminated endless haggling over weight and quality. If you had 10 Oxhide ingots, you knew their value, whether you were in Egypt or Anatolia. This points to a level of commercial sophistication we rarely attribute to such an ancient era. It suggests that across different cultures and kingdoms, there was a shared understanding, a common economic language built on trust and mutual benefit. The very existence of this standardized object implies agreements, perhaps unspoken conventions, about production and value that were honored across vast distances. That peculiar shape, then, is more than a practical design for carrying heavy metal. It is the physical signature of a connected world, a Bronze Age handshake cast in copper, assuring a partner 1,000 miles away that the deal was fair. But these copper handshakes needed a highway to travel upon. Beneath the endless blue sky of the Mediterranean, a web of maritime routes connected every major power of the Bronze Age. This sea was not a barrier, but the fastest, most efficient superhighway of the ancient world. The first true masters of these waters were the Minoans of Crete. Emerging as a major force around 2000 before Common Era, their sleek, oared ships, decorated with majestic spirals, became a common sight from the coasts of Egypt to the islands of the Aegean. The Minoans were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were facilitators, the world's first great maritime middlemen. Their palaces, like the magnificent complex at Knossos, were not just royal homes but redistribution centers, where goods from across the Mediterranean were gathered, processed, and sent back out. They established a model of peaceful, profit-driven exchange that set the template for all who followed. When the influence of the Minoans eventually waned, their role was inherited and transformed by the Mycenaeans of mainland Greece. The Mycenaeans adopted the Minoan trade network but infused it with a more assertive, warlike character. Their voyages documented in clay tablet records that mention spices, metals, and textiles moving across the sea. And always at the heart of this nautical web was the island of Cyprus, whose very name became synonymous with copper, the essential ingredient that fueled the entire system. Sailing these routes required immense skill and specific knowledge. There were no compasses or detailed charts. Navigation was an art of coastal hopping, moving from one visible landmark to the next, always keeping land in sight. Sailors memorized the shapes of headlands, the color of certain beaches, and the patterns of seasonal winds. They likely followed established seasonal routes, traveling east with the prevailing winds in summer and waiting for the shift to return west. This made certain ports absolutely vital. Cities like Ugarit on the Syrian coast and Byblos in modern Lebanon became the cosmopolitan hubs of their day. Imagine a bustling dock in Ugarit where a Mycenaean Greek merchant speaking through a translator bargained for Cypriot copper with a Hittite official, while an Egyptian scribe recorded the transaction in his own script. In these ports, goods were not the only things exchanged. Languages blended, technologies were shared, and ideas sailed from one civilization to another. The very alphabet you are using to read this script has its deepest roots in these Bronze Age port cities, where the need for simpler record-keeping between cultures sparked a revolution in writing. The Mediterranean was not just a carrier of cargo, it was a liquid catalyst for civilization itself. Yet the lifeblood of this system did not flow only by sea. While ships connected the coasts, the interior of the ancient world was knitted together by a different kind of endurance, the steady, plodding rhythm of donkey caravans. These animals were the 18-wheelers of the Bronze Age, the indispensable engines of overland trade. A single donkey could carry a load of about 150 pounds, and by linking dozens, even hundreds, of them together in long trains, merchants could move substantial cargo across continents. Their routes were not paved highways, but ancient tracks worn deep into the landscape by countless hooves, following rivers, skirting deserts, and snaking through treacherous mountain passes. One of the most critical of these bottlenecks was the Cilician Gates, a narrow, winding gorge through the formidable Taurus Mountains in what is now southern Turkey. This pass was the only practical land bridge between the high Anatolian plateau, home to the Hittite Empire, and the fertile plains and ports of Syria and Mesopotamia. Controlling it meant controlling a vast portion of the east-west trade. A caravan master approaching the gates faced a daunting journey. The path was steep and prone to rockfalls, a perfect place for ambush. The weather could turn in an instant, with summer heat giving way to sudden mountain storms. Success required more than just brave donkeys, it demanded meticulous planning. Caravan leaders had to know where the next reliable water source was, where safe stopping places could be found, and how to negotiate with local chieftains whose territory they crossed, often paying tolls for safe passage. This was logistics on a grand, slow-motion scale. Another vital corridor stretched east from the cities of Mesopotamia, like Babylon or Ashur, up onto the Iranian plateau. This route was a lifeline for materials like Lapis Lazuli and tin coming from the east. Here, the challenge was not mountains but vast, open stretches of semi-arid steppe and desert, where the sun was a constant adversary and waterholes were days apart. The caravans moving along these tracks were mobile communities. They included not just merchants and drovers, but guards, scribes to record transactions, and specialists who could treat an injured animal or repair a broken pack saddle. The goods they carried were dense and valuable, metals like copper and tin in ingots, sealed jars of olive oil or wine, and luxurious textiles. Every item had to justify the immense cost and risk of its overland journey. The existence of these routes speaks to a profound human determination. It was one thing for a king to desire lapis lazuli. It was another to organize, supply, and protect a line of 100 donkeys and their handlers on a 2,000-mile round trip through some of the most rugged terrain on Earth. These silent, dusty trails were the tendons connecting the great civilizations, allowing the wealth of the mountains to reach the river valleys and the grain of the plains to sustain the highland kingdoms. Without the humble donkey and the courage of those who drove them, the glittering world of the Bronze Age palaces would have remained isolated and silent. The heart of this entire system beat in the dusty river valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates. Here, in the land of Sumer and later Akkad, civilization itself was an invention born of necessity, and that necessity fueled a relentless outward gaze. The Mesopotamians built ziggurats that scraped the sky and wrote the world's first epic poetry, yet their homeland was tragically poor in the raw materials of power. They had almost no usable stone for building, no great forests for timber, and crucially, no local sources of the metals needed for tools and weapons. This was their great paradox, and it became their greatest motivation. To be a Mesopotamian king was to be a master of logistics, perpetually orchestrating the flow of resources from beyond the horizon. Cities like with its bustling docks on the Euphrates and Ashur perched on the Tigris transformed themselves into the world's first great commercial hubs. They were not just cities, they were central clearinghouses where goods from every direction were received, assessed, and redistributed. Ships from the Gulf brought copper from Oman, caravans from the east brought lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and donkey trains from the north brought silver and tin from Anatolia. Everything had to be imported, and so trade was not a luxury. It was the very foundation of their existence. This desperate need for connection led to one of the most fascinating innovations in economic history, the trading colony, known as a Karam. The most famous example was established by merchants from the city of Ashur, nearly 400 miles to the north, in the heart of Anatolia at a place called Kanesh. Imagine a walled enclave within a foreign city, home to Assyrian merchants and their families. These were not conquerors with armies, but businessmen with clay tablets. From this outpost, they organized the flow of Anatolian silver and gold back to Ashur, in exchange for the tin and luxurious Mesopotamian textiles that the local Anatolian elites craved. The entire operation ran on credit, contracts, and detailed correspondence with the Home Office. And we know all of this in stunning detail because of the very medium they used to record it, the cuneiform tablet. Tens of thousands of these baked clay letters and ledgers have been found at Kanesh. They are the spreadsheets and emails of the Bronze Age. One tablet might be a bill of lading for 20 donkey loads of tin, another a contract between partners, and another a worried letter from a merchant in Ashur to his son in Kanesh, complaining that the textiles sent were of poor quality and would not fetch a good price. This written evidence is priceless. It removes all speculation. Here, in their own words, we hear the voices of these ancient traders, negotiating, worrying, calculating profit, and building a web of trust across a fractious landscape. They mention the dangers of the road, the politics of local rulers, and the fluctuating prices of tin. Through these tablets, we see that the Mesopotamians did not just wait for trade to come to them. They proactively built the infrastructure for it, planting commercial seeds in distant lands to ensure the lifeline of resources never failed. Their entire civilization was, in a very real sense, a magnificent engine designed to transform the wealth of the wider world into the glory of Mesopotamia. Far to the east, beyond the deserts and mountains known to Mesopotamian merchants, lay a civilization that operated on a completely different frequency. The cities of the Indus Valley, like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, were marvels of meticulous planning with straight streets, advanced drainage, and a still undeciphered script. They seemed inwardly focused, a world unto themselves. Yet the archaeological record whispers a different story, one of a quiet but profound connection across an almost unimaginable distance. In the ruins of Mesopotamian cities like excavators have made a startling find: small, square stone seals carved with images of unicorn-like beasts and a mysterious script. These are unmistakably Indus in origin. At the same time, Mesopotamian clay tablets speak repeatedly of a distant, wealthy land called Meluha, a place from which ships brought exotic treasures. Most scholars now agree Meluha was the Indus Valley region. This creates a captivating enigma. How did these two powerhouse civilizations, separated by over 1,500 miles of some of Asia's most brutal terrain, interact? The evidence suggests a trade in luxury and necessity. From Meluha, Mesopotamia coveted beautiful, blood-red carnelian beads, expertly drilled and polished, a technology the Indus craftsmen mastered. They also sought a revolutionary new fabric, cotton, which was cooler and more comfortable than wool in the Mesopotamian heat, along with precious woods like teak and ebony. In return, the Indus cities likely received silver, which they did not have locally, and perhaps fine Mesopotamian woolen textiles. But the nature of this contact is the real mystery. Did Melanhan ships, crewed by daring sailors, make the immense journey around the Arabian Peninsula and up the Persian Gulf? Or was this trade conducted through a long chain of intermediaries, with goods passing from hand to hand through the villages and ports of the Persian Gulf, each link adding to the cost and the legend? The discovery of an Indus-style seal in Mesopotamia does not necessarily mean an Indus merchant was there in person. It could have arrived as a kind of ancient packing slip attached to a bale of cotton, its script unreadable but its authority recognized. This indirect connection might explain why, despite the clear flow of goods, there is so little evidence of cultural exchange. No Indus pottery styles in Mesopotamian homes, no Mesopotamian gods in Indus temples. It was a relationship of pure commerce, a silent agreement between two vastly different worlds who understood value in a shared language of rare stones, soft fabrics, and gleaming metal. This makes the connection somehow more profound. It was not born of conquest or migration, but of a simple, mutual recognition that what one lacked, the other could provide. The unicorn seal in the dust of Ur is a ghostly signature, a reminder that even the most seemingly isolated societies were threads in the same vast, whispering web. Who were the people who kept this vast, whispering web alive? They were the traders, and their world was one of immense risk and surprising social fluidity. On one hand, there were the royal agents, men operating directly on behalf of the great palaces and temples. Their mission was clear: to secure the materials that defined elite power and divine favor. A Sumerian temple required Lapis Lazuli for the statues of its gods. An Egyptian pharaoh needed cedar wood from Lebanon for his ceremonial barge. These state-sponsored merchants traveled with the authority and often the financing of their king. They were more than businessmen, they were diplomats and intelligence gatherers, their eyes and ears in foreign ports, reporting back on political stability, new resources, and potential threats. Their success was measured not in personal profit, but in the glory and security they brought home. Yet the archaeological record hints at a more complex picture. Alongside these official envoys, there may have been another kind of operator, the independent entrepreneur. Think of the bustling Karam at Kanesh, the Assyrian trading colony in Anatolia. The tablets found their reveal a vibrant, family-run business culture. Fathers in Ashur would send tin and textiles with their sons or trusted agents to sell in Anatolia, with instructions to buy silver and send the profits back home. These men were working for the family firm, not directly for the palace. They negotiated their own deals, managed complex credit arrangements, and bore the personal risk if a caravan was lost or prices fell. This suggests a layer of private enterprise operating within, and perhaps because of the overarching state system. The distinction blurs beautifully when we look at the Uluburun shipwreck. Its cargo was a king's ransom, yet its personal effects tell a story of a multicultural crew. Alongside Canaanite pottery, there were Mycenaean swords, Egyptian scarabs, and even a stone weight in the shape of a lion, common in Mesopotamia. This was not a ship of one kingdom. It was a floating partnership, a microcosm of the network it served. The traders aboard were likely a mix, some representing royal interests for specific goods, others acting as freelance carriers for hire, their social status elevated by their unique knowledge and bravery. They were the linchpins of the entire age, translators not just of language, but of value and desire across countless frontiers. Their legacy is not written in grand monuments, but in the scattered cargo of a sunken ship and the careful script of a clay tablet requesting more tin, a quiet testament to the human connections that made the Bronze Age world turn. But this vast web of exchange was never just about moving objects from one place to another. When a caravan of donkeys crested a mountain pass, or a ship dropped anchor in a foreign port, it carried something far more transformative than the cargo in its hold. It carried ideas. The trade routes of the Bronze Age were the world's first information superhighways, and along them traveled the very blueprints of civilization itself. One of the most revolutionary technologies to race along these networks was the light, horse-drawn chariot. Its origins are complex, likely emerging from the steppes north of the Black Sea and the frontiers of Mesopotamia. But its rapid adoption tells a story of shared military necessity. Once the design was seen and understood, its advantages were undeniable. The chariot was not just a weapon, it was a system requiring specialized wood for the flexible wheels, advanced joinery for the lightweight frame, and the selective breeding of horses strong enough to pull it. Knowledge of this entire package, from husbandry to craftsmanship, spread from Anatolia to Egypt and from Mesopotamia to the distant Shang dynasty in China, fundamentally altering the nature of warfare, ceremony, and elite status across the ancient world. It was a technological virus, and trade was its carrier. Artistic inspiration flowed just as freely. A master seal cutter in Mesopotamia might carve a scene of a hero battling mythical beasts onto a small cylinder of Lapis Lazuli. That seal would then travel hundreds of miles, perhaps as a royal gift or a merchant's valuable, eventually impressing its intricate design into the clay of a document in a Hittite court or a Minoan palace workshop. Local artisans would see this foreign style, this new way of depicting motion and power, and they would adapt it. They would blend the imported motif with their own traditions, creating something entirely new. This is how we find similar artistic themes, like the majestic figure of a master of animals, appearing in different forms from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley and the Aegean. It was not copying, it was a creative conversation conducted across generations and continents through the medium of art. Perhaps the most profound export, however, was not a physical object at all, but a way of organizing society. The very concept of the centralized, palace-centric economy seems to have traveled from the city-states of Mesopotamia to the islands and coasts of the Aegean. The grand palaces of the Minoans and later the Mycenaeans, with their labyrinthine storage rooms filled with giant jars of oil and grain, their workshops full of specialized craftsmen, and their detailed bureaucratic records on clay tablets, mirror a system perfected centuries earlier in the East. This was a model of top-down control where the palace collected, redistributed, and commissioned, anchoring the entire economy. The idea that a complex society could be run this way, that writing could be used for inventory lists and not just royal boasts, was a paradigm shift. It was a software update for civilization, downloaded through sustained contact and exchanged along the same routes that brought tin and ivory. Even the symbols used to record those inventories hint at a deeper exchange. The earliest writing systems in Crete and Greece show clear influences from older scripts in the Eastern Mediterranean, adapted to fit a very different language. While not direct copies, their existence suggests that the very idea of representing speech with marks on clay was a concept that moved west with the merchants, a tool too powerful to ignore. So when we look at a Bronze Age artifact, we must see it as two things: the object itself and the invisible cloud of knowledge that surrounded it. The tin ingot brought not just metal, but the latest smelting techniques. The Lapis Lazuli bead carried not just color, but new styles of jewelry making. Every trade ship was, in a sense, a floating university, and every merchant was a professor of distant ways. This constant, low-level cultural pollination is what prevented the Bronze Age world from stagnating into isolated, repeating patterns. It was a continuous, global workshop where the best ideas from anywhere could end up everywhere, sparking innovations that no single culture could have invented alone. The goods were just the excuse; the real trade was in the future. The glittering promise of tin and lapis lazuli came with a terrifying price. For every merchant who returned home wealthy beyond measure, countless others vanished into the silence of a stormy sea or a lonely mountain pass. This was a world without safety nets, where the journey itself was a gamble with the highest possible stakes. On the open water, the Mediterranean was a beautiful but deadly highway. Vessels like the one found at Uluburun were marvels of their time, yet they were little more than wooden shells, utterly at the mercy of the elements. A sudden squall could swamp a ship in minutes. Hidden reefs, uncharted in any modern sense, lay in wait to tear open a hull. Navigation by landmark meant sailing perilously close to rocky shores, especially in poor visibility. The shipwreck we study today was a family's ruin, a king's delayed shipment, and a trader's total loss, all frozen in a single catastrophic moment. Overland travel presented a different suite of horrors. Caravan routes were often through desolate, sparsely populated regions perfect for ambush. Bandits, sometimes former merchants themselves who had lost everything, preyed upon these slow-moving trains of wealth. There were no police to call, no cavalry patrols. A merchant's only protection was his own hired guards, the speed of his donkeys, and his knowledge of which local chieftain controlled which stretch of road and what toll or favor they demanded for safe passage. Beyond natural and criminal dangers lay the ever-shifting sands of politics. The lands between the great empires were not empty. They were home to smaller kingdoms, restless tribes, and rival city-states. A trade route that was safe one season could become a war zone the next if a local ruler fell from power or a border dispute flared. A merchant carrying goods from a Hittite ally could find himself in deep trouble if he sailed into a port now loyal to Egypt. This was diplomacy at the most personal and dangerous level. Yet, against this backdrop of profound risk, the potential rewards were astronomical. Success could elevate a merchant's family for generations. The profit margins on moving a rare material from its source to a desperate market were immense. A load of tin that cost a few donkeys and some textiles in Anatolia could be worth its weight in silver in Mesopotamia. This high-risk, high-reward environment did not just create brave individuals, it forced the invention of systems to manage that risk. We see the early outlines of modern business practices emerging from this pressure. One key innovation was the partnership. No single merchant or even a single city could bear the total loss of a sunken ship or a plundered caravan. So they spread the risk. Investors would pool their resources to fund a voyage, sharing in the profits if it succeeded, but also absorbing a fraction of the loss if it failed. This is a primitive form of insurance and venture capital. The clay tablets from Kanesh are full of such agreements, contracts between family members or associates detailing who provided the silver, who would travel with the goods, and exactly how the proceeds would be divided. Standardization was another powerful tool for reducing friction and uncertainty. The universal Oxhide ingot, with its trusted weight and shape, was a defense against fraud. It meant a merchant didn't need to reweigh or reassay every piece of metal in a transaction. He could count the ingots and know their value. This built trust between strangers who shared no common language. Written contracts sealed with cylinder seals that served as unique signatures provided a record that could be appealed to if a dispute arose later. These were not just receipts, they were legally binding documents that gave merchants a form of security and recourse, even in a foreign land. They created a framework of accountability that stretched across kingdoms. The system then was not built by fearless heroes but by pragmatic problem solvers. They understood the darkness that waited beyond the horizon, but they also calculated that the light of profit was worth the journey. Every standardized weight, every carefully copied contract, every multi-party investment was a small victory over chaos. It was a collective decision that the benefits of connection were worth inventing the tools to make it possible, however perilous the path. All of this intricate connection, however, rested upon a delicate and fragile piece. For centuries, the system had weathered local conflicts and shifting alliances, but around 1200 before Common Era, a perfect storm of challenges converged, overwhelming the entire structure. A period of prolonged climate shifts brought severe drought and crop failures to the eastern Mediterranean, placing immense strain on agricultural societies. This environmental stress coincided with significant movements of people, often recorded in the frantic inscriptions of the last Bronze Age kings as attacks by mysterious groups they called the Sea Peoples. The exact origins of these groups are still debated by historians, but their impact was devastating. In a relatively short span, a wave of destruction swept across the region. The great Hittite Empire in Anatolia vanished from history, its capital burned and abandoned. The mighty city-states of the Mycenaean Greeks, like Pylos and Mycenae itself, fell, their palaces reduced to ruins. Along the coast of the Levant, wealthy cosmopolitan ports like Ugarit were violently sacked and never recovered. Even Egypt, though it survived, was severely weakened, fighting desperate battles to repel invaders from both land and sea. This was not a single war, but a cascading failure, a collapse of the geopolitical order that had enabled trade to flow for centuries. The immediate effect on the networks we have followed was catastrophic. The vital ports that served as international hubs were now smoldering wrecks. The overland caravan routes through Anatolia and Syria became too dangerous, controlled by new, unknown groups or simply abandoned. Most critically, the long-distance supply lines for tin, the lifeblood of the bronze industry, were completely severed. With the central palaces that organized and funded these ventures gone, there was no one to coordinate the immense journey from Afghanistan or to protect the merchants who attempted it. The universal Oxhide ingot, that symbol of shared economic language, ceased to be produced. The written correspondence, the contracts and letters that detailed deals across continents fell silent. The world did not simply become poorer, it became profoundly smaller. Communities that had looked outward for centuries were forced to turn inward, focusing on sheer survival. The art of writing was largely forgotten in Greece for hundreds of years. Technical knowledge, like the precise recipe for making vibrant blue glass or the construction of monumental palaces, faded. This ushered in what scholars often call a dark age, a period of cultural contraction, isolation, and lost complexity. The brilliant, interconnected web of the Bronze Age had been torn apart, its threads cut by a convergence of ecological hardship, mass migration, and systemic failure. The silence that followed was deep and long, a stark reminder that the global connections we take for granted are a hard-won achievement, not a guaranteed state of being. For over 3,000 years, the map of that connected world lay in fragments, buried under dust and silence. The Great Collapse erased not just palaces and cities, but memory itself. The intricate web of routes, the names of distant ports, the very knowledge of where tin came from, all faded into myth. To later civilizations, the Bronze Age became a half-remembered age of heroes and giants, its true nature as a complex global network completely forgotten. Rediscovering it has been one of archaeology's greatest detective stories, a patient reassembly of clues scattered across continents and under the sea. The first major breakthrough came from the depths. The discovery of shipwrecks like the one at Uluburun was akin to finding a sealed ledger from the past. Here was a single moment of trade perfectly preserved. Archaeologists could inventory the cargo, study the construction of the ship, even analyze the personal belongings of the crew. This was not a theory, it was a snapshot. It provided an irrefutable list of what was being traded, and in what staggering quantities, offering a tangible scale to the commerce we had only guessed at from land. But a shipwreck tells you where something ended its journey, not where it began. To trace an object back to its source, scientists turned to a modern marvel, geochemical fingerprinting. Every stone and every metal carries a hidden signature from the earth where it was formed. By using techniques like trace element analysis, researchers can take a tiny sample from a bronze dagger found in Greece or a Lapis Lazuli bead from an Egyptian tomb and match its chemical profile to specific ore deposits or mining regions around the world. This is how we know with near certainty that the copper on the Uluburun ship came from Cyprus, and that the blue stone in Tutankhamun's mask originated in the mountains of Afghanistan. This scientific provenancing draws literal lines on a map, connecting artifact to source across impossible distances. Yet, objects and elements can only tell us so much. To hear the voices of the traders themselves, we needed to break their code. The decipherment of ancient scripts was the master key that unlocked their world. When scholars finally cracked the cuneiform of Mesopotamia and the Linear B script of the Mycenaeans, dry administrative lists suddenly burst into life. These were not just royal chronicles, they were warehouse inventories, shipping manifests, and economic correspondence. A Linear B tablet from the Palace of Pylos might record the allocation of bronze to various smiths, noting each ingot's weight. A cuneiform letter from Kanesh complains about the poor quality of a shipment of textiles and debates the price of tin. These texts reveal the bureaucracy behind the beauty, the meticulous record-keeping that made long-distance trade possible. They give us names, transactions, and worries, transforming abstract networks into a world of real people making deals. The final piece of the puzzle comes from mapping the silent witnesses, the artifacts themselves. By plotting the fine spots of distinct objects, like the Oxhide copper ingots or specific styles of pottery, across the Mediterranean and Near East, a pattern emerges. These distribution maps create a heat signature of contact. A concentration of Minoan pottery on the Egyptian coast marks a frequented trade lane. The spread of Baltic amber beads forms a dotted line from northern Europe to the Aegean. Each find is a pin in the map, and when viewed together, they sketch the ghostly outlines of the forgotten routes. This painstaking work, combining diving, chemistry, linguistics, and cartography, has allowed us to slowly reweave the torn web. It is a reminder that history is not always written in books. It is encoded in sunken wood, in the chemistry of metal, in the impressions of a clay tablet, and in the silent journey of a single, beautiful bead. The greatest puzzle of the Bronze Age trade network remains unsolved. For all our discoveries, we still do not know exactly where all the tin came from. This is not just a minor detail, it is the central mystery of the entire system. If tin was the essential ingredient, the secret spice that made the Bronze Age possible, then locating its sources is like finding the hidden springs that fed a mighty river. Historians and archaeologists have long debated three primary candidates, each with profound implications for how we map ancient connections. The first is the ancient source of Badakhshan in Afghanistan, already famous for its Lapis Lazuli. Could the same remote mountains have supplied both the era's most coveted color and its most critical metal? The second candidate lies far to the west, in the misty, tin-rich cliffs of Cornwall in Britain. The third is a more recent suggestion, the Erzgebirge Mountains, the Ore Mountains, straddling the border of modern Germany and the Czech Republic. Each theory paints a dramatically different picture of the trade world. If the tin was primarily Afghan, then the overland routes east from Mesopotamia were the absolute lifelines of civilization. If it came from Cornwall, then the maritime networks of the Atlantic and Western Mediterranean were far more developed and vital than we ever suspected. If it flowed from Central Europe, then a whole northern network, linking the Baltic amber roads with the Alpine passes, was operating at a staggering scale. For decades, this debate was stuck in the realm of pottery styles and historical guesswork. But now, science is offering a way to listen to the metal itself. Just as geochemical fingerprinting traces copper to Cyprus, a newer, more precise technique called tin isotope analysis is being deployed. The idea is brilliant in its simplicity. The isotopic composition of tin, the subtle variations in its atomic structure, carries a unique signature from the geological province where it was formed. By taking a tiny, drilled sample from a Bronze Age ingot found in a shipwreck or a hoard, and comparing its isotopic ratio to samples from known ancient mines across Eurasia, researchers can, in theory, draw a direct line from the finished object back to its original ore body. This is the holy grail of archaeological provenancing. Early results are already shaking the map. Studies of tin artifacts from the Mediterranean and the Near East have shown surprising matches not to Afghanistan, but to deposits in Europe. Some ingots seem to point squarely to Cornwall, others correlate with the Erzgebirge region. This suggests a scenario far more complex and fascinating than a single dominant source. The Bronze Age likely did not have one tin supply, but several, all operating simultaneously. The network was not a single pipeline, but a web with multiple feeders. A merchant in the Levant might have had access to tin from the east one year and from the west the next, depending on politics, price, and which caravan leader arrived first at the market. This ongoing scientific quest does more than just identify mines. It reveals the astonishing flexibility and redundancy of the system. It shows that these cultures were not dependent on a single, fragile thread, but had diversified their sources, building resilience into their global economy. Every time an isotope analysis matches a Mycenaean dagger to a Cornish cliff, it rewrites a journey. It turns the vast, brooding Atlantic from a barrier at the edge of the world into a potential highway, and it forces us to reimagine the courage of those who might have sailed its waters millennia before we thought possible. The search for tin's origin, then, is far from over. It is a live investigation where each new sample has the power to redraw the connections between ancient worlds, reminding us that the map of the past is never finished. The search for tin was a practical necessity, but some trade missions were elevated to the level of sacred myth. For the ancient Egyptians, no destination captured this blend of commerce and cosmic duty more than the legendary land of Punt. Located somewhere to the south, likely in the region of modern-day Eritrea, Somalia, or the Sudan, Punt was not merely a trading partner. It was a divine source, a paradise on earth from which the gods themselves had originated. Egyptian temple reliefs, particularly those from the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshep, set at Deir el-Bahri, depict the voyages to Punt not as simple mercantile ventures, but as epic quests commanded by the god Amun-Ra. The carvings show sleek Egyptian ships with billowing sails, departing with the blessing of the gods and returning laden with wonders. They unload their precious cargo, frankincense and myrrh trees with their roots carefully balled in baskets for replanting in Egypt, stacks of fragrant resin, gleaming tusks of ivory, logs of dark ebony wood, sacks of gold dust, and even exotic animals like monkeys and leopards. This was not a casual shopping trip. It was a state-sponsored operation of the highest order, funded by the royal treasury and led by high officials. The goal was to acquire the materials essential for temple ritual and royal legitimacy. Incense was the breath of the gods, necessary for every ceremony. Ebony and ivory were the materials of divine statues and the pharaoh's throne. By framing this economic mission as a religious pilgrimage, the Egyptian state accomplished something profound. It transformed the acquisition of luxury goods into an act of piety. The risks of the long sea journey down the Red Sea, the negotiations with foreign chiefs, the immense logistical effort, all were sanctified. The success of a voyage to Punt was proof that the pharaoh was in harmony with the divine will, capable of reaching the mythical source of creation itself and bringing its bounty home. This reveals a crucial truth about Bronze Age trade. For a civilization like Egypt, there was no clean separation between the economy and the cosmos. A merchant sailing south was also a priest on a mission. The frankincense that fueled temple rituals also fueled a vast commercial network. The desire for exotic goods was inseparable from the desire to maintain Mat, the sacred order of the universe. So when we look at those ancient reliefs of ships being loaded, we are not just seeing a record of commerce. We are reading a myth, a story a civilization told itself about why it reached beyond its borders. It was a story that justified the risk, celebrated the connection, and ultimately wove the very act of trade into the fabric of their spiritual identity. But beneath the sacred quests and royal caravans, the entire system relied on something far more mundane, a shared language of weight and trust. In the bustling markets of Ugarit or on the docks of Crete, a merchant from Egypt and a trader from Anatolia faced a fundamental problem. They spoke different tongues, worshipped different gods, and hailed from rival kingdoms. How could they possibly agree on a fair exchange for a sack of tin or a block of Lapis Lazuli? The solution was not found in grand treaties, but in the quiet invention of a commercial infrastructure so intuitive it became invisible. This was the birth of the tools that would make globalization possible. The first and most crucial of these was a universal system of measurement. Across the vast expanse of the Bronze Age world, from Mesopotamia to the Aegean, a remarkable consistency emerged in weight standards. The basic unit was often derived from something simple and ever-present, like a grain of barley. In Mesopotamia, this evolved into the shekel, a weight of about 8.4 grams. This was not just a local standard. Variations of this same weight unit appear in Egypt, in the Levant, and even in the distant Indus Valley. Archaeologists find stone weights carved into elegant shapes, ducks or lions, all calibrated to this common standard. Why does this matter? Imagine you are a Mycenaean merchant holding a carved stone duck weight from Cyprus. You place it on one side of a simple balance scale. On the other, you pour out gold dust until the scales are level. You have just conducted a flawless international transaction. You did not need to speak Cypriot. You did not need to argue over what a handful of gold was worth. The weight was the contract. This standardization eliminated endless, risky negotiation. It created a frictionless economy where value was objective and portable. A shekel of silver in Babylon was understood to be equal to a shekel of silver in Byblos. This was the world's first true currency, not in the form of coins, but as an agreed-upon unit of account that transcended political borders. It meant that trust was no longer placed solely in the person you were dealing with, but in the system itself. The scale and the weight became neutral judges, respected from palace to port. This was the silent, mathematical foundation upon which all the glittering treasures were traded. But weight alone was not enough. How did you prove ownership or authenticate a shipment or seal a promise? This is where another beautiful innovation comes into play, the personal seal. In an age before signatures or photo identification, your seal was your identity. In Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, individuals used small stone cylinders, intricately carved with unique patterns, mythological scenes, or symbols. When rolled across a soft clay tablet or over the lump of clay sealing a jar or a bale of goods, it left a distinctive impression. In Crete and Greece, they used stamp seals, often with beautiful geometric design. The principle was the same. That impression was your legally binding signature, your brand, your unbreakable vow. If a clay tag sealing a shipment of textiles bore the seal of a reputable Assyrian merchant from ashore, it served as a guarantee of quality and origin. It told everyone who handled that bale through every leg of its journey that this was legitimate goods from a known source. It was a tool of accountability that stretched over thousands of miles. If the textiles were found to be substandard upon arrival, the broken seal provided proof of which merchant was responsible. This created a web of reputational credit that was as valuable as silver or gold. A merchant with a trusted seal could do business on promise alone, his mark carrying the weight of his entire commercial history. These two tools, the standardized weight and the personal seal, were the software that ran the hardware of ships and donkeys. They turned risky encounters between strangers into routine, repeatable transactions. They allowed for credit, for contracts, for complex partnerships that spanned years and continents. What we are seeing here is the skeleton of a globalized commercial culture. Different peoples with their own languages and customs, voluntarily adopted these common practices because they recognized a shared interest in making exchange safe, predictable, and profitable. They were not unified by an empire, but by a mutual need for trust. In this light, the Oxhide copper ingot takes on a deeper meaning. Its uniform shape and weight were a physical extension of this same principle, a pre-sealed, pre-certified unit of value. Every time a merchant accepted one, he was participating in a vast, unspoken agreement that bound the Bronze Age world together. This was not just trade, it was the slow, patient construction of a common economic language, the very first draft of a connected world. But for every shipwreck filled with copper ingots, there is a ghost cargo that left no trace at all. The most vibrant, vital, and tragic trades of the Bronze Age are the ones we can scarcely see. Our archaeological record is built from what survives, the enduring metals, stones, and ceramics. Yet the economies of these ancient kingdoms pulsed with goods that have long since vanished into dust, air, and memory. To understand the full scale of their world, we must learn to see the invisible. Think of the most common and essential exchanges. Vast quantities of grain moved from fertile regions like Egypt to feed populations in less forgiving lands. Olive oil, a staple for light, cooking, and ritual, flowed in amphorae from Crete and the Levant. Wine traveled from the vineyards of Greece and Canaan, its clay containers often reused or broken beyond recognition. Luxurious textiles, perhaps the most prized commodities of all, have almost completely disintegrated. We know they existed because of the meticulous records. A Mycenaean palace tablet might list hundreds of women weavers and their allocations of wool. A Mesopotamian text details the exchange rate between silver and a fine garment. The vibrant colors of these fabrics hint at another invisible industry, dyes. The most legendary was Tyrian purple, a color so rich it was associated with royalty. It was produced through a painstaking process involving thousands of murex sea snails, with a yield so small it took tens of thousands of shells to color a single robe. The mountains of crushed snail shells found near ancient coastal workshops are the silent testament to this extravagant trade. The colorful garments themselves long faded to nothing. Then there are the exchanges that leave a different kind of silence. Textual records from across the Bronze Age world, from Mesopotamia to Egypt and the Aegean, routinely mention individuals acquired through trade, often in the context of palace workers, domestic servants, or specialized laborers. These individuals moved along the same routes as timber and tin. Their lives are part of the economic calculus of the age. To acknowledge this is to confront a difficult dimension of these sophisticated networks. The system that exchanged Lapis lazuli and ideas also trafficked in human beings, a sobering reminder that the connections which built early civilization could also enable profound hardship. How do we know about these ghostly trades when the goods themselves are gone? We piece the picture together from three clues. First, the written word. Economic tablets are filled with references to these perishables, detailing rations of grain and oil, inventories of linen and wool, and lists of personnel. Second, art. Egyptian tomb paintings show envoys from Crete offering patterned textiles. Minoan frescoes depict saffron gatherers, hinting at the trade in precious spices. Third, and perhaps most compelling, is simple economic logic. The great palaces were not just political centers, they were massive redistribution hubs that had to feed, clothe, and employ thousands. They could not have functioned without constant, large-scale flows of food and basic materials. The bronze weapons and lapis lazuli jewelry were the glittering pinnacle of the system, but its true foundation was built on grain, cloth, and oil. This means our material evidence, as stunning as it is, represents only a fragment of the whole. For every oxhide ingot on the seafloor, there were 100 sacks of grain that dissolved, 1,000 bolts of fabric that rotted, and countless amphorae of wine consumed and forgotten. To only see the metal is to see the skeleton but miss the flesh, blood, and breath of the Bronze Age world. It was a living system, fueled by the mundane necessities of daily life as much as by the sacred lust for rare stones. The silence surrounding these perishable trades is not an emptiness. It is an echo, asking us to listen more carefully to the whispers left in clay and art, and to remember that the most profound connections are sometimes those that leave the lightest touch upon the earth. The collapse was not an ending, but a long, deep pause. When the dust finally settled after centuries, the world that emerged looked different, but the old paths had not been entirely forgotten. They lay dormant like seeds waiting for the right conditions to sprout again, and when they did, the new networks bore the unmistakable imprint of the old. Centuries after the great palaces fell, a new group of master mariners rose from the ashes of the Canaanite coast. The Phoenicians did not invent Mediterranean trade, they inherited its blueprint. They sailed the same sea lanes first pioneered by Minoan and Mycenaean merchants, but they pushed them farther, reaching beyond the Pillars of Hercules to the Atlantic coasts of Africa and Europe. They established not just trade outposts but full-fledged colonies like Carthage, which became powerful cities in their own right. What the Phoenicians perfected was a direct evolution of the Bronze Age system, turning tentative connections into a robust commercial empire. They even improved upon the tools of the trade, developing a simplified alphabet derived from earlier scripts, a system perfectly suited for bustling port commerce and record-keeping. Their success was built upon a foundation laid millennia before their time. On land, a similar story unfolded. The high, winding caravan trails through the Iranian plateau and the Anatolian highlands, the very routes that once carried Lapis Lazuli and tin between Mesopotamia and the east, never completely vanished. They remained in use, worn deeper by the feet of countless merchants and the hooves of their animals. These paths formed the skeletal framework for what would become, centuries later, the most famous trade route in history, the Silk Road. The Great Persian Royal Road, celebrated for its efficiency, likely followed corridors established in the Bronze Age, when Chinese silk, Central Asian horses, and Roman glass began flowing across continents. They were traveling on a highway whose first stones were laid by donkey caravans searching for a dull gray metal. This is the profound, often overlooked legacy of the Bronze Age networks. They were not a false start or a historical curiosity. They established the basic template for long-distance Eurasian exchange. They proved that it was possible and profoundly desirable to organize societies around the acquisition of goods and ideas from beyond the horizon. They developed the essential toolkit for globalization, standardized weights, trusted units of currency like the Oxhide ingot, commercial law through contracts, and the diplomatic language needed to navigate foreign courts. Every subsequent trade network, from the Silk Road to the maritime spice routes, was a variation on this ancient theme. The impulse that drove a Sumerian merchant to send his son to Anatolia, or an Egyptian pharaoh to send ships to the land of Punt, is the same impulse that has fueled human connection ever since. It is a blend of necessity, curiosity, and the relentless pursuit of a better, richer, more beautiful life. The Bronze Age teaches us that our world has been interconnected far longer than we ever knew, and that the drive to reach out, to trade, and to share is one of the oldest and most powerful forces in our story. That final, long silence after the collapse was a reset, not an erasure. We have followed the trails of tin and lapis lazuli, sailed the ghostly routes of sunken ships, and listened to the whispers in clay tablets. The ultimate revelation is not merely a list of traded items, but a fundamental reimagining of time itself. The Bronze Age was not a prologue to connection. It was the first true era of globalization. Those forgotten routes were far more than simple paths for moving luxuries. They formed the nervous system of a precocious world system. Through them flowed not just commodities, but the very DNA of early civilization, the technologies of chariots and writing, the artistic motifs of gods and heroes, and the revolutionary ideas of how to organize a society. This intricate web of interdependence is what allowed disparate cultures to rise in that remarkable, synchronized chorus. Their fates were literally forged together in bronze, an alloy that could only exist through cooperation across continents. This makes their eventual downfall so profoundly instructive. The collapse was a stark demonstration of the fragility of complex interdependence. When the climate shifted, when political orders fractured, and when those vital supply lines were cut, the entire system unraveled with shocking speed. The interconnectedness that had been their strength became their vulnerability, a lesson that echoes through the millennia to our own linked world. To uncover these networks is to change our perception of the ancient past. We no longer see isolated marvels, a pyramid here, a ziggurat there, a lonely palace on a hill. Instead, we see a dynamic, breathing community. We see the Egyptian pharaoh whose divine authority was painted with Afghan blue, the Mesopotamian king whose power relied on Anatolian tin, and the Mycenaean warrior whose status was proclaimed by Baltic amber. They were all participants in a shared project, linked by a common hunger for resources and a common language of value. This realization invites a final, tantalizing question. If we have only begun to map the connections of the Bronze Age, what other forgotten threads lie buried, waiting to be found? What stories of human ingenuity and reach remain silent in the dust, ready to rewrite another chapter of our collective past? The search continues, and with every new discovery, the ancient world grows a little smaller, and our understanding of what it means to be connected grows ever deeper.